Okay, we are live. So welcome to this panel. This is how to break into being a critic. I am your moderator, Claire. My pronouns
Oh,
are
wait,
she and
Claire, can
her.
you
I'm
hold
going
off
to,
1 second? I don't think we are live, actually.
for sure, I can do that.
Oh, now we are. Never mind. We're good. You can go on, and I will make you host.
There we go. Hi. Okay, I'm gonna say again, just in case that got lost in translation there. This is how to break into being, there you go, I'm the host now. I have all the power. This is how to break into being a critic. I'm your host, Claire. My pronouns are she and her. If anything here doesn't make sense, we're gonna go and assume that it's my fault because I've just moved house and I'm very tired. There we go. So I'm going to ask my lovely panelists to introduce themselves in a minute. But first, I just want to remind everybody that if you'd like to have a chat with us or ask us some questions, we are in the Discord in Swooperton B. Swooperton, that's a fun word. All right, so I am going to I'm going to ask you to start by introducing yourselves, giving folks your pronouns, and telling people what it is that you do. And we are going to start with Elena. Tell me if I pronounced it wrong.
My name is Elena Fernandez Collins. I go online by Ellie. I am a podcast critic, so I critique audio. In particular, I critique audio fiction as my specialty. So I write a newsletter called Audio Dramatic, which is all about audio fiction. So I write essays and media critiques and reviews and stuff. I'm also a podcaster, so I host the podcast Radio Drama Revival, which has been going for 14 years, showcasing fiction podcasts and their creators. Oh, my pronouns are she and they. Sorry.
No worries at all. Can we go for Marina?
Hi. So I'm Marina. I've been kind of a more traditional, I guess, critic. I originally went into media criticism. I started from being a blogger. I went to film school. I started getting published in various places, I think in 2011. I've written for Vice, for IGN, for Strange Horizons, for the Los Angeles Book Review, for the Los Angeles Review of Books, for other smaller things like Book Smugglers and so on. And recently, since I'm also, at some point, I realized that my dream career of being like a full-time critic is not actually my dream career, and I started writing fiction. So now, instead of doing the whole critic thing full-time, I spend that energy on doing a podcast, which is called Pop Culture Sociologist. I also have 2 degrees in sociology, and I love talking about pop culture, so that works. And I'm kind of new to being a podcaster as a critic, and that's what I'm up to.
It's a lot of exciting, cool things there. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself before I butcher your actual name.
Yeah, so I'm Shahrang Biswas, and I'm a game designer, writer, and artist, currently based in New York. I'm also on the Faculty of Computer Science at Fordham University, teaching game design, and I am the game artist in residence at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens. I was for a fairly decent amount of time a video game journalist. I was always freelance, so I was never full-time. But I wrote a lot I started out with Hardcore Droid when I was in grad school, and then I did a significant amount of work for ZAM when that still existed, and then it turned into Radio Set ZAM, and so I was there for a bit, and then when that stopped and changed again, I left that. Nowadays, I do a lot less of what I would say journalism, but I still write. I contribute essays, I feature essay things. So I wrote for Eurogamer's Pride issue last year. I'm doing it again this year. I wrote for Dicebreaker this year. I've written for slightly more semi-academic things like First Person Scholar. I've written for Unwinnable. So that's where my video game criticism stuff coming. I also, sometimes write about in academic settings, and so I guess that counts as criticism, different sort. And I teach, so I criticize everyone all the time.
I'm sure they all deserve it. In either way, good or bad.
I love them. They're great.
No, it's great because you went right into what was going to be my next question, which is to go into a bit more of like your origin story, kind of how you got started. Because obviously, you know, this is all about breaking in to being a critic. So of course, with it being a given that there's not just one way to go, everybody's way of doing it is different and wacky, and you can't try and follow an exact path. I think it would be really interesting to hear about how you got started and how, you know, kind of how you started, say, getting gigs freelance, you know, starting from just writing for yourself into going into paid work.
Well, I'm happy to kick us off here with one of the fields that needs more critics. Please, if you leave this panel, please, for the love of God. So in about 2016, I decided to come off of private on Twitter, which was my first mistake. And no, and then I used that to tell some creators of some fiction podcasts that they did some really incredible work that I really loved. And then I accidentally found the fact fiction podcast community, which was really amazing. And so what ended up happening is that I spent a lot of time on Twitter talking about my opinions on fiction podcasts until a couple of people who had been writing in the field for a little while told me to go apply to Bellow Collective, which is a podcast-focused media criticism outlet. It is an indie outlet. They are wonderful. They're really great. And they are the first people who hired me to write paid work. And it just kind of devolved from there. And now I write for the AV Club and other places as well. So mostly it was, oh, I said words online and then people liked them. Okay,
I mean,
there are
there are worse consequences to having opinions, capital O, online than that. So very glad that that's the way it went. Marina.
So I started from, I mean, I just used to write my opinions on the internet, and I had a blog, and I actually had a live journal, and I started when I was like 15, and I had all these opinions. And by the time I was sort of in my early 20s, I felt like I had really learned how to write well, like to write nonfiction well. And the blog was kind of getting more of an audience. And friends kind of suggested it, and I started looking at maybe places that I could kind of pitch to. I had some friends who were trying to make it as critics. I had a friend who she lived in New York, and she kind of started pitching to the Huffington Post and eventually became salaried there. And I was kind of like, so I live in Israel, and I was born in Ukraine, and I'm an immigrant, and I'm not from the Anglosphere, and this accent is completely fake. If I sounded like the Queen of England, it would be equally authentic to who I am. And I really felt like there was kind of no place for me, and there was no place for my voice. And then Abigail Nussbaum became the head of reviews at Strange Horizons. And Abigail Nussbaum is Israeli. And even though she's not an immigrant, but I mean, like in this country. And I was like, okay. And then she was soliciting reviews. And I was like, okay, maybe this thing, I mean, this is kind of this is the most amazing chance I'm going to get. It's not going to get, this is like a no excuse situation. So I sent some samples, and she accepted me, and I started reviewing for Strange Horizons. And then once I started reviewing for Strange Horizons, I could lean on that to pitch to bigger outlets. And then just like everyone around me who was trying to make it as a critic was like, you have to pitch constantly, just pitch all the time, get rejected a billion times, just constantly have ideas, get really, really good at pitching. So I did, and I kind of tried to do that. And eventually things led to bigger things. And, once like you kind of, when you're pitching like Vice, it's good to have things under your belt that are not just your blog. And eventually it got to a point where there was a new startup that was like a new media startup that was like starting, and they wanted pitches, and they were looking for writers, to staff a writing room. And I had enough stuff under my belt that I could apply to that, and they, were interested. So it just kind of, I don't know whether that's like a super boring way to describe it, but it was basically just pitching constantly, looking for, places to pitch to, and accepting tons of rejection and learning what works for editors and stuff like that. I think like the first time I used to, I was like, I can write really well. Like I'm so good at nonfiction. I write really well. And Abigail Nussbaum like accepted me. And then the first review I sent her, I received it back and I felt like she had just dipped the entire thing in a vat of red ink. And I was like, oh my God, what? So just like learning and not letting the despair of working with so many editors get you down. Anyway.
Shirang, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of parallels with Marina's story, and especially the two points are, one, networking is very important. It is a sad state of the world that the world is not a meritocracy completely, or even mostly, in that you need to network and you need to get to know people, and it's all about like you need to know the people. But the good thing is you can get to know people, right? You don't have to be related to everyone. Nepotism is not as important as networking in general. Absolutely, that's one thing. So I got my start when I was in grad school in Hardcore Droid, because I had a friend who's like, "Hey, Sharang, I write for Hardcore Droid. They're looking for new writers. I know you write nonfiction decently. You should submit something." And I'm like, "Okay, great." And I did, and I got it, right? And the other thing that I really liked that you pointed out very strongly, Marina, was it's good to start in smaller places, because they usually, and this is not trying to, I don't want to sound like I'm denigrating different outlets, right? But smaller places usually will require less of a CV from you, right? They will be like, okay, give me a writing sample. You don't have to be like, here is what I wrote for the New Yorker, right? You can be like, oh, I wrote like Hardcore Droid initially. I'm like, I have never written for games, but here's a writing sample of something else I wrote. And they're like, great, can you write me one paragraph about this free game? And then we'll judge, right? So they were very easy. But when I submit to, when I wrote for Eurogamer, I told them, look at all my work at ZAM that I've written, right? And they're like, okay, you have professional writing credit. So I think that's a big thing. But I want to add a small caveat to that is, if the place you are writing for is making money off of your writing, you should be making money off of that writing, right? So writing for a small place doesn't mean be exploited, right? Of course, there are lots of blogs and stuff that don't make any money, and I'm like, yeah, go write for them, sure. But if they are making money off of your work, you need to be like, hey, am I going to see a share of that? Even if it's not minimum wage, even if they're making $10 total or something, you should be like, well, am I getting like $1 off of that or something, right? So start in small places to build up, but don't let that be an excuse to let people exploit you.
Especially since I want to hop in real quick there. Letting your agreeing to be exploited means that other people will also be exploited and will be exploited worse than you, right? Because if somebody is like if you're white and that person's a person of color, if you're abled and that person's disabled, it's just going to get worse. So please stand up for yourselves. Think about what it is that your writing is worth. Think about the kind of outlets that you're pitching to. It's just really, really important that we all stand together so that we can all get paid equally. I am still a freelance writer right now. It is a nightmare. So yeah, I just wanted to say yes to all of this that Sharang just said.
And as Elena said, it is very possible to just write on the internet on your own and have people recognize that, right? Elena did that. I didn't do that as much, but when the editor of SubQ magazine asked me to write a column for them, I'm like, oh, he must have read all my highly regarded kill screen essays or my feature articles on ZAM. So I'm like, hey, how'd you know me? He's like, oh, I like your tweets. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's it.
Right?
Hey, it gets you loads of places, it just.
I just want to say that. Sorry.
Go ahead. I mean, I have plenty of questions, but if you guys have things to say,
I just wanted to say, because it's something that I really phrased for myself very clearly at some point, where when I consider whether to write for a place and whether they pay or they don't pay or how much of a kind of passion project it is or whatever, the option is always, am I going to gain more or the same amount from just writing it in my own space? you know, like you're never that desperate on the internet. Like you can always, there's a huge value in just writing in your own space where, you know, people are going to know you, and, you know, and you don't have to like dance to anyone's tune. So there's always that alternative. It's never like, you know, this thing or nothing.
Especially
Yeah,
now
that's
that
really
there's so many
interesting because
tools.
yeah, it's just to kind of tie together all of the things that you've mentioned that are all great. You know, we see a lot of this kind of thing in the publishing industry in general, many other industries as well, but the kind of like, oh, you know, you're taking an unpaid internship because you're really passionate about the thing. And of course, the people who can afford to do that are all like middle class, mostly white, you know, very privileged people, and that fosters an environment that's not inclusive at all. And I wonder how that kind of plays with the you know, the democratization that you were just mentioning, Marina. You can put your opinions on the internet. Of course, there's still a barrier to entry because there always is, right? That you have to have your equipment, you have to have the internet, you have to have all of that. But I wonder how you're seeing the role of the critic in modern media evolving, because, you know, for me, my background is I'm a booktuber, right?
So amazing. I cannot even say how amazing this era is for critics.
Right.
Because I remember, again, like when I was in film school, like maybe 15 years ago, and I remember like literally just thinking, okay, I want to be a critic. I need to get editors at serious publications to pay attention to me. I need to prove myself. I need to kind of dance to their tune. And especially in film or like visual media, the
Oof.
criticism like establishment is still extremely white, extremely male, extremely straight. Like it's really depressing. And I remember that being such a huge hurdle. And I remember realizing maybe like 2 or 3 years ago that, for example, YouTube is an amazing place for criticism. And it didn't
Yeah.
always used to be like that. Like it took a while until YouTube like really grew its own kind of stars and its own ecosystem and whatever. But like now the criticism on YouTube is so amazing and so high sort of quality and so nuanced and detailed and really popular. Like it has a huge audience. And that fills me with like, on the one hand, enormous joy. And on the other hand, I'm like, God, why am I 10 years too late? Like 10 years ago, I would just start my own thing and like, that's it. But now like I have a job and stuff and I don't have the kind of time and resources and stuff. So I'm in awe of you, Claire. And I'm just in awe of people who do like criticism in like new media, in podcasts, which whatever I do a little bit, and YouTube. And it's just such an amazing era. Like it's so good. It's just so good.
And they're like I assign my undergrads Feminist Frequency or Game Maker's Toolkit or PBS Game Show, which now stopped. But I'm also Feminist Frequency kind of. But I assign these like YouTube things very often because some of them are very, very high quality. So I think what you were saying about this democratization is very powerful. And if you make good content, and this, unfortunately, take the time and effort to market and share it, because that is its own thing that you need to do. You can have highly regarded stuff, which then might get, if your goal is to work full time for a large company, which it might not be and doesn't have to be, you might be seen by them because you can gain a following that way, and a lot of people have done that, right? Especially with like Twitch, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When it comes to there is such a big breadth of space in like critiquing podcasts, not podcasts that have criticism, but critiquing audio, right? The way that you critique books and the way that you critique movies and film. So I'm gonna take us back a little bit for a very quick history lesson. So in the U.S., right, radio like lost out to TV, right? We stopped regarding radio, especially like radio drama, right, and radio variety shows and things like that, really highly regarded because TV happened and because the US, unlike places like the UK, don't have a centralized system for radio production like the BBC, right? So in the UK and places like the UK, the BBC still has like a stranglehold on that kind of thing. And it's really impacted the way that the UK distributes and understands podcasting and funds them. But in the US, that didn't happen, right? We have this huge dearth of criticism in the US. It just disappeared from public eye, right? If it exists in like very small numbers in academic journals. And so now we're coming back into the stage where audio is taking the spotlight. Audio fiction is really getting into its own spotlight as well. People like Marvel creating things like this, right? With indie people like Atypical Artists doing the Bright sessions and then making their own production studio. So this is a place where we need more critics. We especially need more critics who aren't white, who aren't cis, and who aren't straight, right? Because that's one of the problems in podcasting right now is that the voice of podcasting that people think of is still three white men sitting around a microphone talking about whatever, right? That's still the joke that everyone makes. So this is a place where I think that we have a lot to offer still for critics.
And I just want to mention that in the chat, we've got pointed out that, also extremely able-bodied and neurotypical as well. And that comes into podcasting, because how many podcasts do you see that don't have transcripts? How many YouTubes do you see that don't have transcripts? I'm guilty of that, you know. It takes so long to make the thing. Some part of it gets left out that should not be something that you feel like is optional. So you have to kind of, I wonder how...
Can I pause for a sec? I think that's like an interesting distinction Claire and Elena made, because Elena was talking about the creators being from diverse and historically marginalized groups, while Claire was talking about the listeners being from historically marginalized groups. And those are different things, right? You don't have to be aiming your message toward, like, I don't have to be aiming towards I don't know, men to have to want to bring non-men into my podcast, right? Or into my whatever I'm creating. There is value in bringing in diverse voices and perspectives to the piece of media you are creating, regardless of what your intended audience is. Even if your intended audiences are all rich middle-class women who live in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, there is still value in
get them to
having
donate
listen.
to your Patreon.
Right? Yeah, but there's still value, and they will find value in listening to voices that are diverse, because then the content will just be more interesting, be more nuanced, and be more intelligent. So just.
I mean, I say this as a middle-class woman, white woman, cis, who donates to a lot of Patreons, by the way. No shade. I'm sorry?
You live in the Upper East Side of New York? No.
Oh man, I wish. I live in London. But yes, all right. Let's get back on track here.
I just want to say, since we talked about disability and transcripts, I have a disability, and I when I started like my podcast, and I was super new to it, and I actually got the idea at last year's Flight to Foundry, because I was unemployed due to COVID, and I heard this panel on authors doing podcasts and whatever, and it kind of convinced me that I could do it. And I was really shocked by how the transcript question, for some reason, I thought that like podcasts are so popular now that there would be some kind of automatic tool, there would be some kind of cheat, some kind of hack, something that you could do, and it would just generate a transcript. And I discovered there is nothing like that, or like it's very expensive or kind of out of reach for most
It doesn't like funny accents, though, does it, eh?
Yeah,
no.
Exactly.
It doesn't like funny accents.
And I ended up changing my whole work stream on how I do the podcast, because I was like, I can't live with myself if I don't have transcripts. So like before I was like, oh great, this will be great for my disability, because it's not going to take a lot of time in front of a computer. I can just record anywhere, and I have like, sort of bullet points, and I can talk, and it'll be great. And I did the first episode like that. And after that I was like, oh no, I have to sit and write an entire script and read it, because then I will have a transcript, because otherwise I'm never going to get these transcripts done. So I'm just going to change my entire workflow to accommodate this, because apparently there are no tools, which was very depressing.
And me later. I can help.
Fantastic. Yay, great. I did so much research. I talked to people. No one is all like out of reach things.
I would say maybe one thing that is actually all right. It pains me to say good things about YouTube because it is trash in so many ways as a corporation. But actually, if you upload a file, if you upload a voice file to YouTube, like, you know, the first crack that it takes at doing the auto transcription, like it won't be good, but it'll be like kind of, depending on how easy your accent is to understand for the software, it'll be like, you know, 50 to 75% of the way there, and you can just correct the name of sci-fi and fantasy writers that you say that it doesn't understand. So that is one of the ways, for instance, that I can afford to pay somebody else to do my transcriptions, that I give them that, and then, you know, it is less work for them and they charge me at a discount. So this is a random breaking into tips. But speaking of, do we have any advice? Do we have, you know, you talked to Marina about like the entry into being a critic that was discussed when you were in film school, but obviously that's changed dramatically, and you know, there is now a lot to be gained by, you know, having, obviously giving your opinions online, but also like being very much yourself and having like a personal niche and that kind of thing. And I wonder how, like, what advice you would give to somebody who's wants to start now, in the cursed year 2021, and how do you develop, you know, that CV, even if it's writing for yourself and not necessarily for a publication. And I'm going to ask Sharang first.
Yeah, so this hopefully will not sound too pretentious, but one thing I'd say is there are, especially, okay, there's a difference between I am making something for the fun of it and just putting it online because I want to, and I am making something as a professional to be consumed in that way, or as a means to get employment in certain things, right? Because for the first style, I will never be a gatekeeper. I will try not to be a gatekeeper, right? I'll never be like, you can't do this, right? You write whatever you want. Like, I believe like art should be like free and everyone should be able to make it regardless. So go ahead, have a blast. However, if you want to do it and try and break into the industry or etc., you want to be thoughtful of the fact that there are a lot of people who have opinions on the very thing you are critiquing. You will rarely find something, unless you are a scholar of ancient Assyrian texts actually going on digs. There are very few things that you will discover that no one else has an opinion about, right? And in today's day and age, there are very few things you will discover that no one has a published opinion about, right? So you will want to think about, what are you saying and how are you saying it, right? Are you just saying, I thought this was fun and let me tell you why it was fun? Sure, that has value, but again, a lot of people are doing that, and so for the most part, you will reach and interest people who like you, right? And unless you are very famous, like if you're Chris Hemsworth, then maybe everyone will be like, oh yeah, we like Chris Hemsworth, and we want to hear his opinions. Like, I like Chris Hemsworth. But sorry,
Yeah.
I'm today. But if you want to be like, okay, how do I, like, you know, then get noticed by Vice, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You want to think about like, am I thinking about this in an interesting way, or am I at least thinking about this in a deep way? Because it's easy and perfectly good to have opinions about stuff. But if you want to become a critic, you might want to train yourself into being like, okay, what can I look at this more deeply? Can I look at this in relation to other media of the same kind, or other media of different kinds, what that this is in dialogue with? Or am I writing this in a way that's different? Am I right, like, oh, I'm writing these as though I'm, I don't know, Han Solo. Imagine if Han Solo critiqued things, right? That becomes a different, I'm not saying that's a good idea, but it's a different idea, right? So think about that. I would say that there's some great free resources online that talk about how to do criticism, how to think about things, how to write about things. There's there are books about the subject, right? Like, how do we critically engage with media in a way that's interesting and in a way that's also, and this is key in today's world, in the video game space, in a way that is not mean to game designers, because I would argue that a lot of criticism just assumes that game developers are lazy, and if they'd put more time into it, they could have done this thing. Well,
They're
then you
already
tried,
in crunch.
Where,
right?
where do they find the time?
Right. So that, for example, is an opinion I've seen a lot on YouTube videos where people are like, let me criticize this thing. Oh, this is lazy game development, and I'm like, have you tried doing that? Right. So this is why I didn't want to sound snobby, but yes, everyone can write criticism, and everyone should write. Everyone should make every kind of art they want to, but if you want to be seen and you want to get employment, you need to refine the way in which you think about I don't want to just say write, but communicate about media, because your communication. I mean, you don't have to write, right? You can, like, I don't know, make baked goods that represent your opinion about a certain piece of media. That would be unique, right? Like, taste this cupcake and gain what I learned from this book, right? Whatever. But whatever medium you use, you need to be thoughtful about it. That was me talking for a long time. I will now stop.
So this is amazing. Because I think, I mean, obviously there are plenty of people who do criticism and like their USP is that they are mean. You need to be self-aware about that and figure out what you bring. And I just wonder if Marina or Elena have anything else that you would say about like how to go about that.
Yeah, Marina, you okay if I go?
I was hoping you would go first. I feel like I
Okay,
talked too
great.
much.
All right, fine. I have two pieces of advice here. One is a little bit more practical and one is a little bit more thought focused. So we'll go with practical first. First, yes, you need to like read everything. So I'm going to give you some names of things to go read. So first, Emily Vanderwerf is the critic at large at Vox. She's amazing. She has a newsletter. One of the things that she wrote recently is a like how to pitch article for freelancers. It is really, really helpful. I suggest you go find it. It's like a golden guideline for being able to write a pitch email.
Elena,
It's
at
amazing.
the end of our talk, would you share some of these in the Discord so people
Yes,
can?
I will.
Oh, I'm looking for. I'm
Oh,
getting
dope.
the links now.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Sorry,
second...
I do this for a living, like live stream facilitating. So sorry, you go.
No, you're fine. So that's one. The next thing is that I suggest that this ties into the second point, right? So you need to read everything. This is a good place to start because it gives you an idea of how to pitch. It gives you really concrete guidelines, and also Emily's amazing. Everyone go read Emily's work if you want to learn stuff about how to do criticism well. But the next thing that you need to think about is you need to think about who your audience is. So one of the things that's a very common topic that gets brought up a lot is, right, the relationship between critics and creators and audience, right? And the fact that critics do not write for creators. Like, in general, the primary audience of criticism is not the creator. It's the audience, because we are consuming this work as an audience, and so we are doing this work as an audience, and that's the lens that we are, for the most part, approaching it from. Several people are also approaching it from a combined lens, right, where they're also a creator of the type of work. And so because of this, I think that one of the articles that's really wonderful to read is I Write Plays, I Write Criticism, I'm Not My Own Enemy. I have forgotten the name of the author, but that is the exact title. It is an article from a playwright who writes plays and writes criticism and talks about this relationship, talks about having to do both. And this is really crucial thinking that you need to engage with when you start doing criticism.
So that's in Vulture, and that's by Sarah Holdren.
Thank you. I was like, Sarah.
So that does sound so interesting. Can't wait to check that out. Yeah. I mean, Marina, do you want to go with that or?
Sure. So first of all, I will absolutely agree with everything Elena said about the relationship between critics and creators. Because while I was like only a critic, I had so many. I mean, I locked my Twitter at some point because I couldn't deal with like people who were working on the shows or movies or whatever that I was talking about just coming over and talking to me about them, even though nothing I said was intended for them. It was intended for, for people who are watching. And it's one of the trickier things, I think. And I mean, with authors and I mean, like reviewing books, movies, anything at this point. I mean, the last episode of my podcast was about a show called Person of Interest. I happen to have friends in common with the creator of Person of Interest, like on Twitter. And recently, in fact, a mutual friend like tagged me in a conversation with him. And I was thinking in the back of my mind, like, well, I'm going to do an episode about the show and it's not going to be fully complimentary. So like, this is kind of I mean, I feel like it took me a lot of years to figure out my space in that. And I think a lot of critics also can, especially early on, kind of fall into the trap of a lot of times you're critiquing the things you love. You love books, so you write about books. You love, movies, so you talk about movies, all of that stuff. And if you gain traction and if you start getting more, if people know you, then you're kind of in that echelon of, you start to have direct conversations with these creators, especially, with social media and stuff. And then you have to do a lot of really tricky work of figuring out where you stand and how much your kind of reputation or your integrity is worth versus, what kind of critic you want to be, because there are many different kinds of critics and it's all fine. It's just you have to decide. And sometimes you can't really be all things at once. Like you have to decide where you are. So I would say I mean, I don't know whether this is kind of advice to people who are like 15 now or people who are 25 or whatever, like at what stage of your thing you are. But I mean, I always assume that people who want to break into being critics are people who are going to talk about their criticism no matter what. Like they just have opinions and those opinions have to go somewhere. That's kind of my assumption. Because like, so if your opinions have to go somewhere, I would say start from, if you're like really at the beginning, I would say start from either you're going to build your own space, and that used to be, let's say, a blog, and today that's like whatever, a podcast, a YouTube channel, a TikTok account, whatever it is. Either you're gonna start your own. I mean, we all read that article about book talkers, right? And maybe some of you are book talkers, like, I don't know. But either you're gonna build your own. You are, Elena?
No, I
sorry,
read the article.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't read it, but is that someone who's complaining about the fact that you're just talking about books?
No. So book talkers is like book talkers as in TikTok. So it's book talk. So it's just
obviously, yeah,
like,
okay.
Book critiquing on TikTok, which is a whole other thing. I think the article is called "Crying on TikTok Sells Books," something like that. So it's so I would say either you're building your own space wherever that is, and you're building your own platform, and there the bonus of that is that you go at your own pace and you're just having fun and you can stop anytime you like and you can change things whenever you like and all of that stuff. But your progress there, to talk about what Shrang talked about, is it's going to be slower. Like if you want to improve, it's going to take you longer to improve if you're just doing your own thing by yourself. Like I did that for many years. It took many years to get better. I got significantly better when I was working with editors. So that's the trade-off. Either you do your own space and you go at your own pace, or if you want to break into various venues and you want other people's kind of approval and whatever it is, then you kind of have to compromise in a lot of things. You have to tailor your ideas to something that's going to sell to an editor. You have to do a lot of research. You have to deal with the stress of pitching and getting rejected and all of that stuff. So I would probably, my biggest advice would be just consider that these are two things that you can do concurrently or one at a time, or switch from one to the other when you're tired of them or whatever. And just remember that those two options are always open to you. And neither one of them is like a failure, and neither one of them is replacing the other. They're just two different avenues.
Can I add a quick addition to what Marina said? Really quick, in that what Marina was talking about, like being in touch with creators. It is rarely a good idea to directly message or email or even tweet
Oh
at the
God,
creator
no.
telling them this was terrible or here is an idea I have, do this, right? One, if you say the former, you will just make them feel bad. Like that's just mean. And two, the latter, they're legally not allowed to use that idea for the most part. So by you telling them that makes it less likely that it'll appear in whatever show or whatever you want, right? So remember that creators are people too. So don't be mean to them.
Yeah, and we've got some questions in the Discord. So let's see. I think this might go back to the Emily Vanderwerf article, but somebody wanted to know how pitching is different for critics versus pitching a novel, which I think is going to be a really
How
interesting. Yeah.
very different.
It's super different. Yeah. Marina, do you wanna take this one?
I mean, I just, for whatever, like, I'm at the stage where I'm like querying my novel. So this is truly the.
Maybe you don't want to take this one. I don't know.
No, I'm just like, I'm truly in the weeds of how different it is, because I think pitching an article at this point for me is much easier than pitching a novel. I'm sure other people have it the other way around. So the main difference is that when you're pitching a novel, and I mean, it also depends, I guess, because usually fiction, you don't really pitch novels, you usually pitch nonfiction. But like with fiction, it's more common for you to query. Unless you already have a relationship.
Does that mean you have a full book already that you are then querying, right?
Either a full book, or at the very least you have, let's say, like a third of a book, or you have like something, or you already have like a relationship with that publisher and you have an agent, whatever, and you're just like in the course of, like, it's not really pitching, like you already have a relationship.
It's not cold pitching. Right. It's not cold pitching.
You usually don't cold pitch. First of all, you don't cold pitch like fiction to a publisher anyway. You pitch it to an agent, which is a whole other thing, because for an agent, they're not necessarily looking for something that's fully polished. They're looking for something that they can, maybe improve a little, change a little, or whatever, have a dialogue with you about maybe, doing it a little differently or whatever it is. With articles, I tend to think that there are two different, or like with nonfiction, there are two different tiers of kinds of editors that you would pitch to. Just like Shreng, you said about smaller publications. So with smaller publications, you don't need as much of a CV, and you also don't need to be as like fully on your game when you're pitching. Like you can just be like, hi, I have this great idea and this is me, and do you want to take a chance on me, and like whatever, and the pay is probably going to be lower, or there's going to be no pay, and they will probably work with you. So they will be like, okay, well, send us a draft and we'll send you, our edits, and like, let's go back and forth and whatever. With bigger publications, especially if you're cold pitching, you need to be extremely focused. Like it needs to be like 3-4 paragraphs. The first paragraph is this, the second one is this, the third one is this, the fourth one is this. You need to have, like samples or like previous kind of publications and on all of that. I mean, you don't need to, obviously, I'm sure there are exceptions, but that's like the general thing. And the editor, ideally, the editor wants to feel like you are an amazing professional who can get this article done in half an hour and already have it written in your head. And you're just like, like they need to feel like 100% confident that you can deliver fantastic material that they will not need to work on at all. Like their whole thing is, please do not make me edit this article. Please send me something that requires as little work as possible. I've had with the biggest publications, I just got used to the fact that like when an editor accepts your draft, you don't even get edits back. Just at some point, if they're nice, they'll tell you that it's up. Sometimes they won't even tell you. And then like, you're like, oh, I guess you've already edited my article, put whatever title you wanted, and it's up now. Okay. I had actually, it happened with Tor, where like the original title for an article that I sent them, it's very, very common for editors to not clear a title with you at all. Like you have no input on a title. And the title.
You know that when you read someone's work, they probably didn't pick that title either. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. I see this all the time where people think that the inflammatory or like the problematic title or whatever is like the writer's idea. And it's literally never the writer's idea. And the writer often didn't even know what the title was going to be until it went up. And there was a title that was so kind of controversial on an article that I wrote that I think Linda Holmes from Pop Culture Happy Hour tweeted about how terrible it is. Courtney Milan tweeted about how terrible it is. And I'm like sitting there like, oh no. And then someone is like, well, actually the article is pretty good, but the title is really weird. And I'm like, God. So that can definitely happen. But anyway, the idea is that with pitching, getting back to what we were talking about, the idea with pitching is that you have to be super, super, super focused, and you have to just convey that you are an extremely consummate professional who already has this figured out, which I feel like with fiction, I mean, again, like fiction, you don't really pitch, and nonfiction, I mean, a book is just a much bigger and much longer work. And usually when you sell nonfiction, you sell it based on your reputation, essentially. Like if you are already famous or you have like massive credentials in the field that you're pitching, it's, you know, it's like you can sell a pitch. Otherwise, not, you know,
But,
less likely.
no. I would say that like the one exception here to that, it would be like if you're pitching like a nonfiction essay to a book of essays that's looking for like submissions and stuff, right? So that's going to work a lot more like an article, like a criticism article. And the only reason I bring this up is because my essay in a book literally just got published today.
Happy essay birthday, I suppose.
Thanks. So that's going to look a lot more like when I was pitching this essay, that looked almost identical to the way that I pitch a regular criticism article, right? I had my introduction. I did exactly what Marina is saying, right? I have my shit figured out. I know exactly what it is that this essay is going to be about. Here is my outline in like a single paragraph.
Nice.
This is what you wanted. Like I followed all of your guidelines. Please follow the submission guidelines.
Oh, cool.
Please follow the submission guidelines. And then, you know, like they accepted it, right? And so like that's going to work a lot more similarly. But otherwise, that's just completely different.
And yeah,
sorry.
No, I was just going to say we have a bunch of other questions and we're coming up to time. So would really appreciate, one of the questions is whether you have any other resources or articles for pitching. And obviously we have already had one really good article linked in the Discord. But if you have any other ones that you would recommend, the Discord would be a really good place to put them. And let's see, we do have a couple of other questions. Do you think that people should stick to one format, say only criticizing games or books or podcasts, rather than mixing it up and criticizing all of the things together at the same time?
So I have published erotica as well as teaching special needs students about game design, right? So you can do anything you want. I mean, obviously there's a caveat to that, right? But I would recommend if things interest you, absolutely go do them. Of course, you might not be able to join the CIA, but like that's very specific, right?
Yeah, but if you wanted to do that, that's sus anyway, so
no comment, please, CIA. I'm an immigrant in this country.
I'm sorry. I got my naturalization, so I can say shit about MI6 if I want, I guess.
But
anyway,
and I will go further and say the fact that you write and consider multiple types of art will make your criticism stronger. You can draw on other things because, you know, arts are all in conversation with each other, right? So you can draw on them. Also, from a very practical standpoint, your employment will be smoother because you'll have multiple streams of income, right? So if a magazine falls under, which happens all the time, right? Or if a game studio falls under, again, that happens all the time, you won't be like, oh no, now what do I do? You'll be like, okay, well, let me ping my editor at this film magazine and see if they're looking for a new essay because I have an idea, right? So absolutely write for multiple things. That will also create a bigger audience, and a bigger audience means if that someone who's looking at you from a big name corporation or whatever who wants to hire you will be like, oh, we already have a really big audience in multiple spheres. Please join us and bring all those eyeballs to our magazine. So write all the things.
Yeah, plus one. That's all.
Plus one, even though I was like, that would be my experience just because that was my path. But I always think like, maybe there's value in just focusing on one thing. It's just not what would ever work for me. But I definitely agree with like maybe if you focus on something super specific, like for example, if you were, when you're a critic of podcasts, when there's not a lot of people doing that, maybe it's easier to, or like there's more stuff to do, or like you can gain sort of a name for yourself fast. I don't know. Elena knows about this. I'm just using this as a random example. But maybe like that would work, but I don't really know anyone who is interested in critiquing multiple things, but is artificially making themselves only critique the one thing. Like, I don't think that's really reasonable or possible. Like, usually, like, you will just do all the things, and that's fine.
Well, you can have different channel, have two different shows, right? One that
it can be a platform thing as well.
Yeah. Like your YouTube show is all about scented candles, while your blog is all about footwear, right?
Right. The thing is, because YouTube wants you to be boring and focus on one thing, right? And so that's why people do second channels and stuff like that. I was on a panel earlier yesterday with Emily Lau, who vlogs at Emeloid, and she said that she wanted to be a mood booktuber, like a mood reader, but for video making. And I was like, yes, that is what I want. That is my new goal in life. I've stolen it from her. But yeah, I mean, we are out of time, and it's such a fun discussion, and I could listen to you all talk for many more hours. I do have another panel
actually
to
listen to
moderate,
Elena
like,
talk,
now.
right?
Thanks.
I mean, it's on the show, so.
I mean, that is true. That is true. We can, in fact, go and listen, read, watch folks talk for a long time. So that's really, really cool. On that note, if you would please tell folks where they can find you online.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, screaming into the void, at Showmark. That's SHOMARQ. And yeah, you can find all of my stuff there, and also yelling about horror movies on Thursdays.
You can find me on Twitter at Berlin_Marina. My podcast is called Pop Culture Sociologist. Has episodes about like why the show Hannibal is the best adaptation of Nabokov's Lolita and stuff like that. Which it totally is, and you cannot like whatever. Anyway, there's a 30-minute like thing for you to understand why it's correct. Anyway, so you can find me on Twitter. You can find me at the podcast. You can find me on my website, which is marinaberlin.org, because .com was taken by some other Marina Berlin who I do not know.
Listen, the woman who owns Claire Russo on Instagram is a really, really beautiful French fashion model. And like, I'm sure she's a lovely person, but I like insult to injury, you know?
My name is Sharang Biswas. You can find me on Twitter at Sharang Biswas. That will link to my website, which has not been updated a lot in the pandemic because it's the pandemic, and as well as to my itch.io page, which has only a fraction of the games I've made. That's astrolingus.itch.io, but everything will be linked to my Twitter, including a lot of like essay work I've written, criticism stuff I've done. I'm a lot less prolific than these wonderful co-panelists of mine in that field. But
that's fine, because your worth is not defined by your output, and capitalism sucks.
But thank
It just
you everyone.
ends on anti-capitalism, yeah.
But thank you everyone who's watching for the gift of your attention, and I hope we didn't bore you by talking very fast and very badly.
The Discord is singing your praises and talking about how much they are loving this discussion and the report. I am spamming links into the Discord. I need to end this panel now because I have to moderate another one, so I need to go and see my next couple of panelists. But thank you so much, everybody. Fantastic discussion, and see you all on the cursed Twitter.
Thank you for being a great moderator, Claire.
Yay!
Yay!